There's a feeling that a lot of us are walking around with, carrying, that we either can't put into words, we can't articulate, or even if we can, we don't want to tell anybody about it. And it's the feeling, a deep feeling, that there is something wrong with us, that we are broken, that we are flawed, that we are inherently bad to our core, that we're unworthy, that we're unlovable. And this feeling, in schema terms, we call the defectiveness and shame schema. And it's probably one of the most important schemas because it gives rise to many other schemas that you might have recognized in yourself. So in this video, I'm just going to talk a little bit about how this feeling develops and some of the ways it manifests. But it really does require a few videos because the defectiveness and shame schema is pervasive. It is responsible for so many of the issues that we struggle with as humans. So first of all, I'm just going to talk a little bit about how it manifests, but I will go into this in more detail in a later video. But you might recognize it in terms of a self-critical voice. So if you're constantly criticizing yourself, beating yourself up, putting yourself down, calling yourself an idiot or stupid or a loser or a failure, then defectiveness and shame is likely underneath that. Or if you are a perfectionist, you're constantly trying to optimize your time. You're constantly focused on the next achievement. You're constantly putting yourself under pressure to do everything perfectly. Defectiveness and shame will be driving that perfectionism, the unrelenting standard schema. Or if you've watched my video on people pleasing, underneath self-sacrifice, approval seeking, and subjugation schema, which all combined into people pleasing, is the defectiveness and shame schema. And also, if you have difficulties with connection and socialization or relationships, maybe you get anxious around people, or you worry about being judged in some way, or you feel different than everybody else, defectiveness and shame is underlying that. So as I said, I will go into a lot more detail in a later video, but for now, I just want to talk about how it develops because, I've said this before, if we really understand how these patterns develop, it can take away a lot of the self-criticism because you understand that this pattern developed as a survival mechanism, and it doesn't mean that actually there is anything wrong with you. And in fact, there isn't anything wrong with you. You are not broken. Nobody is broken. The things that we struggle with are due to neuroplasticity, are due to the way our brains adapt to our childhood environment. So the defectiveness and shame schema, it's a total body experience. It has thoughts, a story attached to it, which will be something like, there's something wrong with me, I'm broken, I'm flawed, blah, 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 I'm unworthy, I'm unlovable. If anybody got to know me, they'd reject me because they see how bad I am. So that's the kind of story that plays out. The experience of it at its extreme is shame, is toxic shame. Just like you feel it throughout all your body. You don't feel right in your own skin. You don't like spending too much time with your own thoughts or your own internal world because it's too painful. Often we feel disgust at ourselves. Also, it creates anxiety because we're constantly worrying about things. Because we are bad, we think that people are going to judge us and people are not going to like us and people are going to reject us. It causes loneliness, sadness, all sorts. So many different emotions come from this deep feeling of shame. Although we won't consciously experience it like shame, we feel it as insecurity, maybe, or just not feeling good about ourselves. And the behaviours, as I've said, are usually represented in other schemas. So how does it begin? Well, going back again, we have to, I'm like a broken record, I know, but we have to remember that our brains evolved to live in a tribe. And, safety came from approval and acceptance from the tribe. So a baby's amygdala is constantly looking through the senses to see if it's being attended to, if it's being cared for, if it's safe, if it's approved of, if it's loved. And the amygdala recognizes love in, when we're very young infants through the facial expressions and body language of our caregivers. And what the amygdala wants to see is looks of delight in our caregiver's face. So when they see us, they're like, they express joy when they see us. I call them looks of delight. And obviously, we can't get them all the time, but we need to get them enough. And the problem is that, we don't have the tribe anymore. We're lucky if we have two parents or a grandparent or grandparents around. For the most part, our parents are stressed, struggling emotionally themselves, under pressure, to bring in money, or they're of the belief that, that being critical will encourage us to be better as people. So quite often our young brains don't get the looks of delight. They don't get the affection and the care. Often what our amygdalas experience is dismissal, is being ignored, is being criticized, is being shouted at. And, of course, extreme abuse and neglect causes this schema to develop, but also just even things that don't seem so obvious on the surface. Like, if we have a parent who is struggling in some way and they're always angry or they're always shouting at us, or we feel like we are a nuisance or an irritant or a burden in some way. And what the brain and nervous system does, because this is a biological survival response, in the face of any kind of disapproval from the tribe, the brain generates a feeling of shame, which is supposed to prompt us to kind of fix the situation or to become smaller and not so much of a problem. So it generates this feeling of being bad. And as children, we don't understand what's going on. We can't look at our parent and go, or caregiver and go, oh, you're having a bad day. I understand. I know money's tight right now. I know your relationship's not going great. I know you've got a shitty boss, and that's so I understand you're not going to give me a look of delight. Obviously, the child isn't thinking that at all. The child is just reaching out, looking for connection, to feel that they are safe, that they're cared for, that they're loved. And what they might get is like, oh, don't bother me now. I'm busy. I'm stressed. Just go to your room. Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, I'll look at it later. Just a million little cuts of rejection over and over and over again. And our system develops this sense, and we absorb the message, I am not loved. So therefore there is something wrong with me. Not that there is something wrong with them. There is something wrong with me. And this becomes wired into our biology. And then it will just stay. It's deep, because shame is a survival response. And, in a healthy, emotionally healthy family, you might experience it a little bit now and again. If we step outside of, the boundaries of the family or the rules of the family, if the family is healthy, then for the most part, we're going to get looks of delight and love and presence. But often, as I said, in a lot of situations, this is just not the case. And then as young children, we develop this awful feeling of not being loved, and we will do anything to get away from feeling it. So other schemas start to develop as a way of trying to gain love and approval in other ways. Then it just doesn't disappear on its own. In order to heal this schema, we first of all need to recognize it. And, Brené Brown talks about shame a lot. She says, shame grows in the dark and withers in the light. And it's true. The first thing we need to start doing is being able to express it in some way. And if we haven't got someone to talk to, then the first start is in a journal. So if you recognize any of this in yourself, then the first step is to really try to take on board that it's not your fault. It's not you. This is not a part of you. It's become embedded in your brain and nervous system through the process of neuroplasticity, because your brain was doing what it has evolved to do given the circumstances that it unfortunately found itself in. So if you take anything from this video, just take that message that if you feel broken and bad and wrong and flawed, it is your brain generating that feeling from an old experience, and it's become wired in, but it's not you. And it developed through neuroplasticity, and it can heal through neuroplasticity. So I'm going to be doing more videos on shame, as I said, because it's really important to understand. So if you have any questions that you'd like me to kind of address in future videos, or any questions about this video, then feel free to leave them in the comments. But as a way to start working through this schema, just start paying attention. Pay attention to your body. Pay attention to when you feel small, when you feel bad, and just look at what's going on. What stories are you telling yourself? What narrative is going around your head? The first step of healing any schemas is to become aware of them.